being out and being myself for the first time is the most amazing thing, and I highly recommend it.
Welcome to Grain Rainbows, the podcast community for people coming out LGBT plus later in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell. Wherever you are in your journey, I hope this podcast will help you feel less alone. Before I share today's interview, I want to remind you that you can find more episodes of Grain Rainbows on my website at grainrainbows.com, and you can subscribe to the podcast for free in your favorite podcasting app. You can also get show notes automatically via our newsletter. Just go to the link in the show notes or text Grain Rainbows to 33777. It's Grain Rainbows to 33777. Spell grain with an A. I would love to hear from you. You can send me email at grainrainbows@gmail.com, voice feedback via speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis, and you can post to the Grain Rainbows fan page on Facebook. On Twitter, it's GrainR. We also have a private group on MeWe, which I will tell you about after the interview. My guest today is Angela Williams from South Carolina. I appreciate that Angela volunteered to share her story, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. Angela Williams, it's great to have you on Grain Rainbows.
It's great to be here.
So the way that I usually do this is I just let people share their story, and then we go from there and see what happens. Does that work for you?
Sure.
So if you want to just tell the audience who you are and then tell us a little bit about your story.
My name is Angela Williams. I'm in South Carolina in the buckle of the Bible Belt. My kids are grown-ish. I'm turning 50 this year, and it's been an exciting last couple years for me. My first chapter I call the first 48, and the brief rundown of the first 48 was literally born at seminary, at the hospital down from the seminary where my father was finishing up his ministerial study. So, did the whole preacher's kid in the South. I was the good kid, though. Just want to put that out there. And I stayed out of trouble and got good grades in school. Honestly, sat on the front row or second row behaving during church for every Sunday and Wednesday and Sunday school and vacation Bible school and all the things that you do in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina when you're Southern and go to church. Part of that, I'm realizing later in life, was I literally walked the path exactly as it was put before me without really another thought to any other way of living my life. And what I mean by that is I got married at 18 to a man who was turning 25. Looking back now, I think, what was I thinking? But at the time, and I have jokingly told my grown kids, that's just what we did in the late 80s in that particular church organization, which was different than the denomination that, my father was a minister and we had, changed up somewhere in my elementary school years. At the time, this was what I was going to do with my life. I'm going to marry a man. I'm going to have several children. I only had 4. That was a medium-sized family where I was at the time. Even down to homeschooling them, wearing the denim jumpers. I was not good at baking bread or gardening. Just you can forget about that. But I was taking care of kids and animals and people and things like that. And so, I was walking the path that I was conditioned to walk in my life. And the man I married was a Bible college student because of course he was. So I went from being a preacher's kid to a pastor's wife. I must have been in my 20s. I know, still a baby, when he actually started working on ministerial staff. And I had kids in 1990, 92, 95, and 99. So by the year 2000, I'm turning 30. I have 4 children, and I'm homeschooling the older ones, and I'm a pastor's wife. Probably had already started 2 chapters of a mother support group. I was doing okay-ish, I thought. Then our whole family moved to another state to start a church, and we were uprooted really from our support system. A couple families went with us, but establishing different relationships in a new city, it's a little stressful for anyone, especially with kids and reaching out. But I'm an extrovert, so I did that. And I started another chapter of a mother support group with a national organization. I think I started a 4th one at some point. But somewhere in there, I was probably 40 when I started really feeling like, am I just here for everybody else? And the immediate thought was, well, that's selfish. Yes, of course I'm here for everyone else. I was the wife, the mother, the leader, the nursery coordinator. I babysat other people's kids and animals, and still not good at baking bread, but everybody forgave me because I did everything else. I really was the hub for the family, even some for extended family, and doing pretty okay, shouldering the load, having some health issues, but okay, I'll get a little help for that and I'll keep plodding along. Somewhere in my mid-40s, though, I really felt like, looking back, I started waking up. My kids were getting a little older, more independent, didn't need constant supervision. Still, teenagers need supervision, but not every moment of every day. Started doing a little reading, a little interacting with people online, branching out a little bit in my friend group and realizing, hey, wait a minute. That's not all there is to life, is to be here for everyone else. I can have my own hopes and dreams and desires, and shoot, I might even have a non-productive hobby, and that's okay. I also, within the relationship I was in, started looking at it and going, no, this is not balanced. This is not partnership. This is not equality. You might say I became a bit of a feminist, a little undercover, but, somewhat of a feminist for the preacher's kid and pastor's wife. Somewhere in there, we stopped going to church. That's a whole nother podcast of deconstructing from religion. Even as my children graduated from homeschool, because of course I homeschooled all 4 of them all the way through high school, I met a friend. I made a very good friend on the internet, on Facebook, in a statewide homeschooling group. And her question to me was, after I answered several questions about homeschooling in our state, she messaged me privately and said, how inclusive is your support group? I'm like, it's inclusive? I could almost smell her fear and trepidation over Facebook Messenger, which I know I'm seeing it, but promise it was there. So we chit-chatted a little bit, and finally she asked me, have you had any same-sex parent families in your organization? Oh, light bulb moment. I had all sorts of rainbow things on my Facebook profile, being an ally for at least one of my children. And I said, oh, absolutely. Only a handful. We've had a family with 2 moms, but they moved, and we had 2 dads, but they've moved because we're military in college town. I said, it's only a handful, but this is the South, so it's a little rare, but absolutely treated just as well as anyone else. Friend breathed a sigh of relief. We continued to chat. She moved to our area with her 2 children. We became fast friends. And I became Aunt Angie to her kids, and they named my car. And when she was going through a hard breakup, I took her kids to field trips because, mine had graduated, but I was still running field trips. I'm in a way embarrassed to say that in my late 40s, I had my first real live lesbian friend. Had never been exposed to anyone on what I call the LGBTQIA rainbow. I work for a large corporation, and they're quite LGBTQ friendly as well. So I'm, brushed elbows with people at work, and it's a very inclusive work environment, but never on a personal level. So we were mom friends, just like mom friends, until I'm trying to remember when it was, and the timeline really doesn't matter. It was several years ago. Handmaid's Tale came out, and she came from a very strict fundamentalist Christian background, as I did. And so whenever that show was on, I would go over to her house. Her kids were in bed or they're visiting their dad, and I'd go over in my pajama pants and t-shirt curl up on her couch and we'd watch TV. I had never felt so at home, safe, and comfortable in my entire life. And she reflects back and she says, "Girl, I knew you were gay because you let that 18-inch bubble around you. You let up on that." I didn't sit so close that we were touching elbows. I didn't lean my head on her shoulder or anything like that. But I felt at home. And it was just a different sense of home that I'd felt literally in my entire life. And I started to question, whoa, what is this feeling? And why am I feeling this with a woman? Hold on a minute. Said nothing to anyone. Continued reading, learning, growing, different support groups for parents of LGBT kids. Walked in Pride with my work group as an ally, of course. Was talking with another close friend on a very personal level. And I said, I'm learning about a lot of things, trying to learn about my kids. And I'm wondering if maybe I'm asexual. And she goes, really? Why? We talked a little more in depth. And this friend said, well, I hear you, but have you ever thought that maybe you're gay? What? No. Why would I be gay? I don't know what you're talking about. We continued the conversation. But the seed was planted and the thought was there. And I thought, what? No, this is a very intuitive friend. Wonder how she saw that. Kept running all the things, doing all the field trips, working full time, being Aunt Angie, and the close lesbian friend. She married her wife in a backyard wedding. It was beautiful. Rode there with my husband and very out of sorts, didn't know why. And I saw a woman across the room and I was introduced to her as another close friend of my friend that was getting married. I felt such a panic and I couldn't put a finger on it for a few minutes. And then I realized, oh, my heart is beating faster and I'm starting a cold sweat just looking at her across the room. What is that? What is that? Oh my gosh. And it kind of hit me on a Sunday afternoon in Asheville, North Carolina. Oh, I wonder if she's right. Okay. So again, questioning quietly, but what am I going to do with it? At that time, I'd been married maybe 29 years. Still had one child living at home. And then in 2018, I had not one, but two surgeries, one on my neck and one on my shoulder. And I'm in a very large Facebook group for people deconstructing from religion. And someone had posted their book, just simply called Pure. It was about the purity culture that, of course, I had grown up in. The whole courting, not dating, saving yourself for marriage, very strict patriarchal purity culture upbringing. And I thought, well, that book looks interesting. That might be good to read. I got it from the library, flipped through the table of contents, got frightened, shut it, closed, and put it down until I was recovering from surgery and I would have time to process the book. I started reading the book and the words started swimming on the page. I couldn't get up and do anything. My arm was in a sling and I was on pain meds. I thought, well, maybe it's the meds. I'll try again later. This time I could focus a little better. I'd read a few pages, put it down, watch TV, read a few pages. It frightened me because it opened up an entirely different way of thinking. And that one path that I had been conditioned to be on suddenly had several offshoots. And I was realizing I could choose and I could feel. And there were several stories of women who had grown up in the same type of purity culture that I had, who a little bit later in life, maybe not age 48, but a little later in life had figured out, I'm gay. Similar struggle, married, wondering what it was all about, why they seemed to be happy for a while, but really felt empty. Then they must be asexual. And then just realizing that they're gay. And I don't mean one or two, I mean 5 or 6, like case histories. And I just sat there and read them, probably with my mouth hanging open. And I just sat there stunned. And it hit me. I'm not asexual. I'm not too depressed to feel because I had been going to therapy and working through some things in my life. And I realized I am not straight because that's all I could put myself up to at the time. I couldn't even say the word, not even to myself. And I might add that earlier that year, because this was December of 2018, Earlier that year, same friend, same conversation. I just must be asexual. I don't know. He won't go to therapy with me, and I don't know what to do. Same friend said, have you considered that maybe you're gay? And I said, I don't know, maybe, but what would I do about it? Change the subject. After I read the book, paced around, still with my arm in a sling, not reaching or lifting, I called my friend and I said, hey, how are you doing? Well, I'm recovering, blah, blah, blah. And I said, guess what? She said, what? I said, you're right. And she started to laugh. Didn't even need to tell her. So that was a fun conversation, probably early 2019. I might have waited to January and tossed it around a bit. So meanwhile, the marriage is just finally showing the strain that was there all along. I mean, for the previous 5 years, just different things I would finally look at and go, this is not healthy. And I would make some incremental change. And of course, that would upset the apple cart. And then I would smooth things over because, of course, I did. I was the hub and I kept things running. So the husband did go to therapy with me once, twice, wasn't very productive. And our 30-year marriage came to an end with a conversation in a Starbucks. And he said, I think we both know neither of us will be happy if we stay. And I looked at him and I looked around the Starbucks and I choked down tears, which felt weird because I was relieved. And I said, you're right. And we might have talked about a few minor details at that point. I really can't remember. It's a bit of a blur. And I had set the boundary for myself that I was not going to talk to him without a third party or unless we were in a public place for my comfort, for my memory, so I could say, no, we were sitting here doing this when we had this conversation. And so I have a very vivid memory of literally being, you're right, and almost, if you will, hearing the door close. There were details to be sorted out, who was going to live where and when and how. And I didn't think I could move out because remember that part where I got married when I was 18? I married right out of my mother and father's house, had never lived on my own. And at 48 years old, I did it. I had my car. I had bought a laptop earlier that year, which seems like a small thing, but I do a lot of volunteer work, social media, packed up my laptop, pieces of furniture, put down a deposit myself with my own finances, got an apartment. And I moved out within probably about 6 to 8 weeks of that conversation. Very tense 6 to 8 weeks. I slept in the sunroom for a couple weeks, went and stayed with a friend out of town who'd had surgery with the, excuse of helping her. But really, I just didn't want to be in the house. We had decided to split and it was very awkward. And still, I had not said anything to him about my orientation. I'd really only said something to my very first lesbian friend, M, and the intuitive friend who already knew I was gay before I did. We'll call her D. And the friend I went to help, though, funny story, I was going to sleep on the futon and I got there and she's like, you know what, Ange, we've been friends forever. She was a friend from my old church, the one where I met my husband and got married. She had had abdominal surgery and was propped up in her king size bed. She goes, look, girl, please, that futon is not very comfortable. If you want to plug in your CPAP over here and sleep on the other side of the bed with me, I'm fine. I'm not afraid of your gay. And we laughed and laughed. And you know what? I slept in the bed on the other side of all her, I don't know what kind of pillows. And I cooked and I cleaned for her and I shopped for her. And we joked that I was the sister wife that she needed at the time. And she wasn't afraid of my gay. And so I tested it out on a few people that I'm not straight. And then, well, I think I'm gay. Well, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out.
I need to take just a moment to remind you that I'm always looking for people to share their story. Almost every guest I've had on Grain Rainbows has told me that not only has sharing their story been a powerful experience, but they did it in the hope of helping others. If you want to share your story, just send me an email at grainrainbows@gmail.com.
So somewhere in that time frame, I had been talking to the woman I met at the wedding. And we met up for music and dinner or something. And some of her friends were going to come and we're talking. And I just kind of casually said, I'm questioning everything in my life right now. And I mean everything. And I'd seen her once before at our mutual friend's house for game night or housewarming. And she said, "Oh, really? Like what?" And I said, "Well, like, I think I'm not straight." And the look on her face was priceless. She said, "Oh, I had you in the," I said, "Uh-huh." She said, "Yeah, the married church lady heterosexual box." I said, "Yeah, so did I for 48 years now." So coming to grips with the fact that there was more than one way I had to live my life was one of the most amazing, freeing, frightening things. And looking back, I can say, in grade school, oh, yep, there was that little girl in first grade, Irene, and we were fast pals. And I cried and cried when she moved away. And then there was that girl in middle school. And they were just very, very small tells because, again, being gay was not in our vocabulary in our home. It was literally not a thought. Dating boys was almost not a thought, but you can marry them. Right. So as I was moving out, then the daunting task of deciding, how do I tell people? What do I tell people? Do I even tell people? My children, they're now 20 to 29, so they were like 18 to 27. One of them said, and I said, I need to tell you something, and well, I don't know. And I hemmed and hawed, and I said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm figuring out that I'm not straight. One of my kids' answer was, "Mom, I hope you know I already figured that out a while ago, and great. I don't have a problem with whoever you might date." She said she was just needing some time to process that her parents were splitting, but it didn't matter to her who I dated as long as I was happy. Two of my kids were team go, "Mom, yeah." However, instructed very quickly that I could not date any of her teammates on her roller derby team. Okay, I'm 48. I think that someone in their 30s is probably not, but okay, I'll stay out of your roller derby team. Thanks. Team go, Mom. The youngest, we were already having a hard time communicating and whatnot, still living in the home. My youngest actually did not interact with me on more than a functional level for about 6 months after I moved out. And that was really hard. And I gave her space to process. And when she was ready, she said, "Hey, Mom, can we get together?" I'm like, "Sure. You want to have coffee?" "No, I'll come to your place." My child, who had barely responded to text messages or put something out on the porch that I'd left at the house to pick up, sat on the floor of my apartment with me, and we just talked and talked and talked. And I was anxious about the conversation because I really, didn't know how it would go. And she said, "Well, we can start wherever you like, Mom." And I said, "Hey, you called this meeting. What do you want to know? Anything's good. I'm glad that we can spend some time together." Her first question was, "So how did you figure out that you're a lesbian?" And so I told her the same story about reading a book on purity culture, of all things, helped me to come out to myself. And I did not come out to their father until I was already looking at apartments, signing leases, and I worked an odd shift from home, and he would stay out until I was going back to work at 9. Sent him a text and said, "Hey, can you come in a little earlier tomorrow night? I want to have a chat." And I told him I'd found an apartment, blah, blah, blah. And somehow I took a deep breath and said, "And I'm figuring out that I'm not straight." Now, there had been little hints. I'd been to my friend's house and watched a documentary on late in life lesbians. And she had posted about it on Facebook. And at first I was mortified. And then I thought, no, let him see it. Evidently he did. He just said, "Oh, that looked interesting. I'd like to watch that." What? Okay. So there were a few tells, a few hints. I mean, my kids were not shocked. Isn't it funny how people close to you can sense things maybe before you're willing to admit them to yourself?
Yeah.
So I told my husband I'm not straight. He looked really relieved, asked a few awkward questions, And I think I hugged him and said, okay, well, I'm getting my keys on the 10th. I'll be packing up and I'm going to work now. Bye. And that was that. We had been married for not quite 31 years at that point, because that was April and we had gotten married in June. So my third daughter, in her early 20s, I would send her little Snapchats and pictures of the things that I was collecting for my first apartment at age 48. I got the futon. I got the retro looking TV stand. I had my desk for work in this big, light, airy, 1-bedroom apartment with a big garden tub. And I'd text her and say, hey, I'm going to light some candles and take a bath on a Saturday night. And she's like, Mom, so am I. We're living parallel lives. You're living the 20s you never had. And she wasn't wrong. I learned how I like to spend my time. I started fixing the food that I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat it, standing in my pajamas at the sink. Who does that? Well, I did for the first time in forever. Grocery shop for one person, that was an adjustment and a little bit of a sticker shock because I really didn't need a whole lot. And I already worked from home, so I came and went as I pleased. I could stay up late if I wanted to. I could leave the TV on in the other room if I wanted. It was really, again, living the 20s I never had because I was babies and breastfeeding and then being pregnant again and then potty training and then homeschooling and all the things. Still not baking bread, but I'll buy the bread. It's okay. It's kind of a Christian homeschooler stereotype where the denim jumpers bake the bread. So that's the first 48, as I call it. Oh, and I had a few dates and learned how to go on dates with the lady I'd met at the wedding. She lived about an hour away. And she was like, you sure you don't mind driving? Yeah. Now, I will say, and this is an interesting phenomenon in different parts of the United States, in the lesbian community, I've heard that people who've been out their whole lives can seem a little skeptical of those of us who are just discovering later in life. And we had lots of conversations about that before we ever went on dates with the woman I had met at the wedding. She was understandably quite afraid or nervous or uncomfortable with being the first person that I was with, because my catalyst, if you will, was actually my friend. And it was platonic and peaceful and helped me realize there's a different path I can take. And I really like this, sitting with a woman, watching TV. And for a lot of folks I've heard, they fall in love with a woman hard and fast, and that's how they discover. I discovered from being with a friend and reading a book. I'd never kissed a woman, and here I am telling people that I'm not straight. And then I did use the umbrella word queer for a little bit and gay, and I can actually say, hey, I'm a lesbian now and not flinch. But it's been about a year and a half now, so took a little practice. So graciously, there was a woman, and we went on dates and to concerts and things, and it went fairly well. Then I was friend zoned after about 6 weeks due to some unhealed personal situations on her part, and I was okay. I wasn't a crumbling mess. We parted as friends and amicably. And it didn't blow up and I wasn't crushed. I mean, I cried a little, but hey, she was an adult about it. And I still had my good circle of homeschool mom friends and then friends of friends. And I'd even taken a stand-up comedy class for women with my oldest daughter sometime in 2018 between surgeries. And I had done a little stand-up, some open mics, even open mics at a larger comedy place in the city where my friend lived that I stayed with. And that was exciting. And, I was branching out, meeting people, doing different things, finding out what I liked to do as a person and for myself, because I was finally free to do so. And at some point And I could find it on my Lockdown Personal, no, you can't see it, YouTube channel of most of my comedy routines. There's one in particular where I'm wearing, go ahead and laugh, a baseball shirt, rolled up jeans, and some Chuck sneakers. Watched the video and I went, I look comfortable in my own skin. That facial tension, the cold sweat, the clenching palms, nervousness of being out and about and around people that I'd had for 48 years of my life had melted away. Go figure. Look at that. I'm gay. I'm good with it. I'm good with me. It's like I finally settled into my own personhood. And I told people at the homeschool organization, I call it my flying leap, where I gathered up all the different things in my life and I threw them up in the air. You picture like a cloud. And I would go, I'm going to keep that one. That's important. Like the inclusive homeschool group. That one, nope, not so much, not so much. Oh, I'm going to keep this one and that one. And I realized I could choose what was important to me, and that was okay. And I could also streamline what I was doing and not try to do all the things all the time, because I realized looking back, that was a coping mechanism for me not to have time to feel. I was so busy working full time, volunteering, doing the family things, taking care of everybody's everything, that I didn't have time to take care of myself or to think about myself or for myself. So it was a lot of a shock when I did stop to do so. And the surgeries honestly helped that, because I wasn't allowed to go and do. And it also gave me the space just to be and to process. But I have noticed in the South, which was my point of Gold Star lesbians or lifelong lesbians, however you want to say it, it seems like in the South, in the Bible Belt, there are more of us who haven't had the opportunity to explore who we are until a little later in life. It seems to be more common, the graying rainbows or the later in life lesbians, or however you want to phrase it in the South. We're not unheard of. So I started going out, going to things. I would bump into coworkers who would say, oh, who are you here with? Who are you here for? Me? Oh. And then they'd look and I'd look and they'd take a breath and go, oh. I said, yeah, I'm not here as an ally. Oh, good for you. Yeah, the second 48 is off to quite the good start with fresh new relationships with my grown children, like literally just starting. Hi, I'm Angela. I'm your mom. How are you? Nice to meet you. With grown kids on an adult to adult level as my own individual person. One of my children, I'm going to cry. One of my children said to me on the phone one day when we were talking about my epiphany, and she was sharing some things about her life, and it's amazing how safe and open can be with you when you're authentic and open with them. So I learned a lot about her, and she said something that I will never forget. She said, Mom, I'm so glad that you are finding your voice. She said, when I was growing up, you really didn't say much of anything. And she goes, oh no, hear me out. Yes, you read stories to us. You talked to us. Trust me, there were so many words. I just wanted them to stop some days with 4 children, age 9 and under. But she said, you didn't have a voice in our household. When we would have a family meeting and Dad would talk and say the things about whatever needed to change or we needed to do better or whatever it was we were talking about, he would talk and talk and talk, and we would try to pay attention. And then at the very end, he would look at you and say, do you have anything to add? And she said, Mom, you would go, agree with what you said. And that was about it. That was very hard for me to hear, but also very healing for me to hear, to have my grown child recognizing, to hear at 48, 49 years old, Mom's finding her voice. And whether it was meant to be that way or not, patterns of my childhood were perpetuated. That's just how it happened. I really did not find my voice to the ripe old age of 48.
I want to take a moment to tell you how you can support Graying Rainbows financially. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/Graying Rainbows. Your contributions help offset expenses like hosting and editing. One thing I really like about Patreon is that you can pick a monthly pledge that fits your budget. That's patreon.com/Graying Rainbows.
And I have something to say, and it's worth listening to, and I can listen. And much to my good friend's amazement, I can sit in silence peacefully with another human and not have to fill it because I'm uncomfortable. So lots of changes. Coming out was part of a very large process for me. And I even did, I think in AA, they have you make amends and you write a list of people you've wronged and you contact them. Well, for me, I made a list of people I want to be sure to come out to on a personal level and not them catch a clue on social media. So I'd already called my siblings and I'd already spoken with a cousin or two I was close with. And I made a list of probably 15 or 20 people. And depending on the connection, I called or I texted and I shared a bit of my story. And a few were more awkward than others, but for the most part, everyone was receptive and accepting. Some were more enthusiastic than others, but every one of them was good. I'm glad for you, and I'm glad to see you happy. My sister-in-law said when I called early on, as I was moving out probably, and told my brother and my sister-in-law, well, I've got news. Are you sitting down? They're like, yes. Because remember, my big brother was at my wedding when I was 18 and, had visited and interacted with my family over 30 and a half years at that point. And I told him that I was leaving the marriage and the household and that I was figuring out that I was gay. My sister-in-law, without missing a beat, said, oh, well, that explains it. I said, explains what? She said, oh, your social media. You're posting pictures of yourself out doing things with friends, smiling. You look happy. I haven't seen that in a long time. And that's when I knew this is going to be okay, because of course it's going to be okay. But it really solidified for me, other people states away can see the transformation in my countenance just in a matter of months.
Are your parents still alive?
They are. So that's a hotbed right there. My father is 87 and very not accepting. And even though he lives nearby and I manage his care, he is elderly and mentally ill and not accepting. I'm not sharing with him really any details of my life. And that's for self-protection. I already have an idea of just my leaving the husband, how that would go. So my mother, my dear sweet mother, who's 84 and lives in a nursing home, states away. Her sister passed and I flew for the funeral last fall. And she and I had a few minutes to sit to the side. And she had said, I haven't seen the husband's name in several years. I said, yeah, he didn't really travel with me. My oldest daughter does. She couldn't come this time, blah, blah, blah. She mentioned again. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go there. Here's my opportunity. Because, telling your 80-something-year-old parent over the phone, I packed up and left a 30-year marriage. It's kind of a lot to do over the phone. But, she's grieving her sister. I want to be considerate. But the universe opened up that opportunity. And I said, Mom, can we go over here and talk? She's like, yeah, sure. So we went and we sat. I think we were in the side room for 45 minutes. And I told my brothers, depending on the situation, I may at least tell Mom that I've left the marriage. And they're like, okay, sis, we've got you, whatever you need to do. I stumbled on my words because my mother had endured the same environment that I had, very patriarchal, religious situation. But I just said, there's a reason you haven't seen him. And we really just haven't been functionally together for the last several years. we've grown apart. And I told her some specifics where, I distanced myself financially and otherwise. And I said, back however many months ago, I left. She was surprised. But once she caught her breath, she blinked a few times and she said, "Good for you." And I'm sure I started to cry because I was so afraid to tell her. Now, little backstory, she stayed married to my father for close to 30 years. She left my father when my younger brother had graduated from high school and was going off to college. She waited, and she suffered, and she waited until the kids were grown. Because, well, honestly, that's what we're conditioned to do. And unless there's physical abuse or adultery in that particular culture, you just don't leave. But she did. And it was hard for her. We talked some more. And at the end of the conversation, she did that thing, where, I don't know, older ladies take your hand and pat them. And hold your hand and pat them. And she said, "Honey, I love you and I'm proud of you." That conversation went absolutely miles better than I ever imagined. She's grieving her sister. We're there for the funeral, but we had a little pocket of time. I didn't come out to her then. It just seemed like that was the right amount of information at that time. So, since we're talking about my mother, the cousins and siblings decided that we weren't going to wait for another funeral for us to get together from Denver, Chicago, Columbia, Charlottesville, Virginia. I mean, literally, several corners of the eastern, mid and eastern United States. And somehow somebody booked some rooms in Williamsburg, and we were going to visit for several days and nights in Williamsburg after Christmas. Great. And my mother was coming. Well, I really was thinking, well, maybe this is a good time to come out to her. Maybe not. Maybe so. Maybe not. Maybe so. Maybe not. Wrestling with it. The universe decided that because by that time, I was dating someone. My first lesbian friend? Yes. The day after I got friend zoned, she messaged me on Facebook. "Hey, there's someone I want you to meet." Really? Yes. I've been waiting to introduce the two of you. You're both in a hard place, coming out of hard relationship issues, and I think each of you could use a good friend. The short version is I'm recording this from the living room in the house we share. And we went to the doctor today, and we're each other's emergency contact, and we use the word partner and all the things. It did take 7 months for me to U-Haul it, not the second date. So I consider that very slow lesbian progression. But we were both healing and healing together. So by Christmas time, I was about to move in or had just moved in with my partner. And it looked like she wasn't going to be able to travel with me for the holidays, but then she could. And I'd already invited my oldest daughter. So, hey, the three of us drove up to Williamsburg, and my mother was coming in a day or two after. Someone said, "Well, I mean, if you're not ready to introduce her to your partner yet, we could do a three's company." I'm like, "A what?" Play her off as your friend. I said, no. After all this, I can't. No, I'm not comfortable with that. If I'm going to bring my romantic partner with me to a family vacation, she's going to be my partner. I'm not comfortable with that. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever. So I'm trying to call my mother when she's on her way. My brother had gone to pick her up an hour away. Well, her phone's not working and it's going right to voicemail. So then I'm in a panic because I really didn't want her to meet us all for dinner and then spring a female partner on her just 8-9 months after I've said I've moved out several months ago and left the marriage. So I was able to meet her at the car, sat with her in the hotel room. And my sister-in-law, the one who said, "Oh, that explains it," she was like, "Do you want us to leave?" I'm like, "No, stay, please." I'm starting to sweat. And somehow I found the words, which is still hard for me, believe it or not. I can sit here and talk on a podcast all day long, but sitting face to face with a family member, quite daunting, because in my family, we didn't discuss such things. And that's something I'm still learning to do. But I sat down with my mother in a hotel room in Williamsburg and I said, "Mom, I'm learning a lot about myself these days." "Really? Good. Okay." I said, "Yeah. And what I'm discovering is I'm interested in women." "Really?" "I mean, well, I'm gay." Oh, lots of blinking ensued. but not a frown, accepting my 84-year-old pastor's wife, mother, who put us through Christian school and homeschooled us and all the conservative things. Oh, well, okay. And I said, and I'm dating someone and I've brought her with me on this trip. I'd like you to meet her. Oh, I said, you can ask me anything. And she chuckled and said, well, now that might be a dangerous opening. I said, really? And my sister-in-law started to say something to kind of smooth things. I said, no, that's okay. Let's give her a time to process this. This is a lot. It's been a lot for me. I'm sure it's a lot for her. And my mother says, well, how long have you been dating? I said, 7, 8 months. Oh, and where do you see it going? I said, what? What do you mean? Where do you see things going in your relationship? And it dawned on me, she's not missing a beat. She just wants to be sure I'm happy and with someone who's good for me and I'm good for them. And holy cow. And I said, oh, do you mean like marriage? Yes. What? Oh, yes, that is legal now in all 50 states. And she chuckled and said, I know. And I said, well, she is the type of person that I can see myself committing to and spending my life with. Well, good. I didn't faint. She didn't faint. No one cried. I might have sworn under my breath a little bit just out of amazement. So meanwhile, I'm texting my partner. She's like, how's it going? Are you okay? I'm holding space. I'm like, okay. I'll meet for dinner in 30 minutes or something. I had like an hour to come out to my mom before she met my partner at dinner. And right, no pressure, which is why I wanted to talk to her on the phone or something. But I wasn't sure up to the day she came that she was going to actually be there. So I go back to my room, fall down on the bed, splash some water on my face, dress for dinner, gather up my partner, my daughter, and my mother is then sitting in the lobby with my cousins, my siblings, and they're sitting around and just chit-chatting, waiting for, I don't know, our dinner reservation or something. And so my partner and I are standing over to the side and we're waiting for a break in conversation so I can introduce her. And we do. And I kind of cleared my throat so my brother would see and let there be a pause. And it was like, oh, can you imagine being that partner? She's already been bombarded with the wild cousins and the older brother and the younger brother and the sister-in-laws and sharing a hotel room with my grown daughter and me and her. But you know what? She was a trooper. My mom looked up. She saw the two of us and she said, oh, you must be partner's name. Yes, ma'am. Stepped forward, shook her hand. And she did that little old lady thing again where you hold somebody's hand and you pat with the other hand. And she said, well, it's good to meet you, and smiled. And then the conversation continued just like it was nothing, but it was everything because the acceptance was there. And we sat with my mother for that dinner. And then the next morning, all at breakfast, smiling, talking, just like I had brought someone of any gender with me. My mother, who's 84, is accepting, and I had no idea.
Well, I really appreciate the fact that you volunteered to share your story with me. I think it's got something for everybody. Well, I mean, you've addressed a lot of the things people worry about. One reason why I'm doing this show is because I really think coming out later in life is different than it is for someone younger. The issues we face are different.
They are. Especially if you're leaving a long-term hetero relationship, there's layers to it. People are processing that you've left, you're divorcing, you're splitting, and then they're processing this whole another realm of a concept about you as a person.
Is there anything else you'd like to share before we close?
Being out and being myself for the first time is the most amazing thing, and I highly recommend it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. You know, a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are still not out. And so that's why I'm trying to get as many diverse stories as I can. And some people take longer. Some people take shorter. I recently talked to somebody who just struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled for many years before finally, there's also no one size fits all, right?
No, not at all. I look, I questioned for a year or two, and then I took a flying leap. It's not for everyone, but it did work for me.
Angela, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I really appreciate Angela's courage and candor as she shared her journey. Her story reminds us that each of us has a different path, despite the bits that we have in common. I'm in awe of women like Angela, who are eventually able to embrace their own self-worth despite a lifetime of being brainwashed. We also saw the positive impact she's having on her own children despite her divorce. She reminds us that embracing an LGBT plus identity is about so much more than sex. The full name of the book that Angela mentioned is Pure: Inside the Evangelical Movement That Shamed a Generation of Young Women and How I Broke Free by Linda K. Klein. I'll have a link to this in today's show notes. I also want to remind you that you can find more episodes of Grain Rainbows on my website, grainrainbows.com, and you can subscribe for free in your favorite podcasting app. You can get show notes automatically via our newsletter. Just use the link in today's show notes that appear in your podcasting app, or text Graying Rainbows to 33777. That's Graying Rainbows with an A to 33777. I'd really love to hear from you. You can write to me at grayingrainbows@gmail.com or submit voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis. You can also post to the Grain Rainbows fan page on Facebook, and on Twitter, it's @GrayingR. We have a private group on MeWe. The reason we moved the group from Facebook to MeWe is for better privacy. If you'd like to join, just send me an email at grayingrainbows@gmail.com. If you're already a member of this MeWe group, please take a moment to post your comments about this month's episode. Also, you can email me if you're interested in sharing your story. And if you want to support the show financially, don't forget to go to patreon.com/Graying Rainbows. I'll be back next month with another episode of Grain Rainbows. In the meantime, I hope you'll check out my other podcasts, Brain Science and Books and Ideas. Thanks again for listening. I look forward to talking with you again very soon. Grain Rainbows is copyright 2020 to Virginia Campbell, MD. You may copy it to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at grainrainbows@gmail.com.